The palace floated high above the clouds on a distant planet. Its towers sparkled like glass and corridors shimmered with soft lights. Yet, inside its walls, silence weighed heavier than the vast sky outside. The queen walked slowly through the halls, her robes flowing behind her. Her children followed her with quiet steps, their eyes always alert, watching every shadow, every servant, every visitor. They trusted no one. The queen sighed. Her children had been like this for as long as she could remember. No matter who came to the palace, no one could reach them. Teachers, tutors, advisors, even friendly aliens from nearby planets, all had tried. The children would listen politely but never laugh, never play, never share their thoughts. The queen often caught herself imagining what their laughter might sound like. She missed it terribly. It was not that the children were mean or cruel. They were careful. The palace had seen battles of politics, schemes from outside rulers, and betrayals from those who promised loyalty. The queen understood why her children built walls around their hearts. But she still wished they could live without fear. She wanted them to feel joy, to see the world as something more than a place of danger. One morning, as golden light spilled across the palace floors, a new figure appeared. He was small compared to the towering aliens and moved quietly, almost as if he did not want anyone to notice him. He wore simple clothes and carried a mop and a bucket. He was a human, an outsider in every way, and his name was Jack. Jack's first day was not exciting. He cleaned floors, polished railings, and scrubbed corners that no one else looked at. The palace staff ignored him as if humans were meant to serve quietly and stay invisible. Jack, however, had a curious mind. He noticed small details, the way the sunlight bounced off crystal vases, the sound of his own footsteps in empty halls, the faint scent of flowers that grew only on this planet. Most of all, he noticed the children. He saw them standing in doorways, peeking around corners, whispering to each other in low voices. They had large eyes and their expressions were serious. Jack sensed a sadness behind their careful faces, a longing for something they did not yet understand. At first, the children paid no attention to him. They had been taught to ignore strangers, to trust no one. But Jack did not mind. He kept working, humming quietly to himself. Sometimes he tripped over a broom or spilled water and he would laugh at himself. The sound was strange to the children. They had not heard laughter like that in a long time, warm, simple, and free. Curiosity drew one child closer. He watched Jack slip on a wet floor and land in a heap. The human sprang up, smiling, and said, "Well, that was clumsy of me." The child blinked. He had expected anger or fear, but Jack only laughed again. The laughter was contagious. The child felt a small smile tug at his lips. Quickly he turned away, pretending he had not seen it. Days passed and Jack continued his quiet work. He left little surprises along the palace halls. Small doodles of funny creatures, tiny folded papers with jokes written in simple symbols, and strange patterns made with colored sand. The children found them one by one. At first they were cautious, studying the objects as if they were traps. Then, slowly, a giggle escaped one child. Another followed. Soon they were laughing softly when no one else was around. The queen noticed the change immediately. She walked through the halls and caught glimpses of her children smiling in secret. Her heart lifted. She did not know who was behind it, but she knew it was something special. Someone had reached her children in a way no one else could. Jack remained unaware of the queen's attention. He did not seek praise or recognition. To him, the work was simple, and the joy he saw in the children, however small, was enough. He continued to clean, to draw, to leave tiny surprises, all with a quiet hope that the children would feel a little lighter, a little happier. By the end of the week, the palace felt different. The corridors were still clean, the towers still sparkled, but there was something new in the air, a sense of possibility. The children still trusted no one fully, but they began to watch Jack with curiosity rather than suspicion. They began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, not all strangers were threats. The queen smiled from her chamber, watching through a crystal window. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years she felt hope. Her children's hearts were slowly opening, and it all began with a small, unnoticed human who laughed at himself and left tiny moments of joy in a lonely palace. And so, in a place of silence and suspicion, laughter began to return, soft, hesitant, but real. The queen whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, "Perhaps trust can grow again." The palace was quiet once again, but now it was a quiet filled with curiosity. The children moved through the halls, peeking at corners where the human janitor, Jack, had been. They watched him as he mopped floors, dusted crystal shelves, and polished the shiny walls. He worked slowly, carefully, humming songs in his soft human voice. One day Jack carried a bucket full of water to clean the main atrium. He slipped slightly and a little water spilled on the floor. He jumped back, laughing at himself. The children, hidden behind a large golden pillar, exchanged glances. They had not expected him to laugh at something so small, so ordinary. For a moment they felt curiosity instead of fear. Jack did not notice them. He began to wipe the water with his mop and sang a silly little song. One of the children giggled quietly. It was a sound so soft that even the walls seemed to listen. The child quickly hid behind the pillar again, pretending nothing had happened. But the laughter had escaped and the other children heard it. Slowly they stepped out of hiding just enough to peek. Jack started leaving small surprises in the palace. On the first day he drew funny creatures on pieces of parchment and placed them on tables where the children might see them. They had long ears, wobbly legs, and enormous eyes that looked surprised all the time. The children found them one by one. At first they frowned, thinking it was a trick. But soon they began to smile, tiny smiles at first, careful not to be noticed. The next day, Jack left tiny folded notes with riddles and little jokes written in human symbols. One note said, "What can fly without wings?" The children puzzled over it, whispering to each other. "A cloud," one of them whispered finally. Another child tried it aloud and a soft laugh followed. They had not laughed so freely in years. Jack did not leave messages for praise or attention. He left them because he liked to see small sparks of happiness. He cleaned quietly, hummed softly, and smiled to himself when he noticed the children discovering his little surprises. Each laugh, each giggle was a gift to him, even if the children never thanked him. The queen watched her children from her private balcony. She saw their cautious smiles, their small laughter, and she felt hope. She had never thought a human could make such a difference in her palace. Her children had always been so wary, so distant. Yet here they were, curious, laughing, and even talking quietly with each other about the strange surprises that appeared. The children began to leave small notes back for the human. They wrote questions, puzzles, and funny drawings. Jack discovered them one afternoon and laughed softly. He replied with his own drawings and riddles. A small, secret game began between them. It was simple, quiet, and full of joy. The palace felt lighter, warmer, as if the walls themselves were smiling. One day one of the children took a brave step. He stepped closer to Jack as he polished a large mirror in the main hall. "Why do you draw these things?" he asked softly. Jack smiled. "Because I like to see people happy," he said. The child blinked. He had never heard anyone speak like that. He expected jokes to have traps, gifts to be tests. But Jack was simple, kind, and genuine. Another child watched from the stairs. She wanted to step forward too but hesitated. Trust was not easy for her. She remembered the stories of the palace, of spies, of tricksters, of enemies disguised as friends. Yet she could not help watching Jack, and for the first time she felt a strange feeling. She wanted to trust him. Jack noticed the children looking and waved gently. "Hello there," he said with a small, friendly grin. They froze, unsure how to respond. Slowly one child smiled and then another. Laughter bubbled up, soft and careful at first. Jack laughed with them, not at them. The sound was warm, simple, and free. By the end of the week, the children sought Jack's presence. They no longer hid as often. They followed him quietly, curious about what he would do next. Sometimes they asked him riddles, sometimes they tried to trick him with small puzzles. Jack always played along, laughing and replying with gentle cleverness. The queen could hardly believe it. Her children, once silent and mistrustful, were now curious, playful, and even brave enough to laugh. She watched from her balcony, tears of hope in her eyes. A small human, unnoticed by most of the palace, was teaching her children something no one else could, that joy and trust could be gentle, simple, and real. Jack did not need rewards. He cleaned, drew, and played small games because it made the palace brighter. The children were learning slowly that not all strangers were threats, that laughter could exist even in a place of silence, and that friendship could begin in the smallest ways. And so, the palace was changing. The halls were still grand, the towers still shone, but now they held whispers of curiosity, giggles, and small, warm laughter. Trust was growing, quietly, gently, one small act of curiosity at a time. And the queen watched, smiling, knowing that her children were learning something more important than any lesson she could teach, that laughter could heal and trust could grow, even in the loneliest palace on the most distant planet. The children were no longer just curious, they were beginning to trust Jack. Slowly, carefully, they followed him through the palace halls. They still kept a distance, watching his every move, but they no longer felt the fear that had always shadowed their steps. Jack noticed their attention but never pushed. He worked quietly, humming softly, leaving small surprises along the way. One morning, Jack brought a small basket filled with colorful pebbles he had found near the palace gardens. He placed them in patterns on the marble floor, making shapes that looked like stars, flowers, and tiny animals. The children discovered them while walking to their lessons. They stopped, stared, and finally smiled. One of the children bent down and moved a pebble, creating a new shape. Jack watched from a distance and clapped softly. "That's perfect," he said. The children froze. No one had ever praised them so simply, so kindly. Usually, adults demanded perfection or ignored their small efforts. But Jack's words were gentle, honest, and full of warmth. Slowly, another child joined in, arranging pebbles into a long, twisting line like a snake. They laughed softly as it curved across the floor. Jack smiled and knelt down to help, showing them how to make circles and patterns. He did not take over. He guided gently. The children were amazed. No one had ever treated them like partners before, not servants, not tutors, not even their advisors. Jack treated them as equals, and it felt strange and wonderful. Over the next few days, the children began to test him. They hid little objects along the corridors, hoping he would notice and react. Jack noticed every single one and responded with gentle amusement. When a small toy alien was placed on the stairs, he picked it up, turned it around, and made a funny face at it. The children giggled quietly from behind a curtain. One afternoon, a child set a harmless trap, a string across the hallway, tied to a small bucket of colorful feathers. Jack stepped carefully but pretended to stumble, causing the feathers to fly everywhere. The children erupted into soft, careful laughter. Jack laughed too, not mocking them but with them. It was a moment of pure connection, a bridge of joy forming between two worlds. The queen noticed the change from her balcony. Her children were smiling openly now, interacting with someone she had never imagined could reach them. She felt a surge of hope and curiosity herself. She had seen clever diplomats, skilled teachers, and even entertainers try and fail to reach her children. But this human, so ordinary in appearance, had found a way through their walls. Jack also began telling simple stories. He did not use complicated words or long lectures. He told small, silly tales of his life on Earth, about humans playing strange games, slipping on banana peels, or chasing rolling balls. The children listened intently. At first they were cautious, watching for any trick, any hidden danger. But Jack's stories were always harmless, filled with laughter and wonder. Slowly the children began to ask questions. "What is a birthday?" one of them asked. "Do humans really eat chocolate for happiness?" another wondered. Jack smiled, answering patiently. "Yes, chocolate can be sweet, but happiness is something we carry inside ourselves too," he said. The children nodded thoughtfully. It was not just the stories that fascinated them, it was the human himself who spoke with honesty and kindness. The palace began to feel lighter. The corridors echoed with soft laughter and whispered questions. The children were learning the first lessons of trust, that someone could be kind without asking for something in return, that laughter could be shared safely, and that curiosity could lead to friendship. One evening, as the sun set and the towers reflected the golden light, Jack found the children waiting for him in the garden. They had brought small drawings and gifts for him. Little stones painted with colors, pieces of fruit arranged in patterns, and small folded notes with symbols and words. Jack accepted each one with a smile, touched by the gesture. "This is beautiful," he said gently. "You made all of this for me?" The children nodded, shy but proud. Jack knelt to their level. "Thank you. I will keep these safe." The children realized something new, that giving and receiving kindness could feel safe, even exciting. By the end of the week, the children were no longer hiding. They followed Jack openly, asked him questions, played small games, and shared quiet laughter. Trust was forming slowly, carefully, but it was real. The queen watched from her balcony, her heart full of hope. Her children, once isolated and fearful, were opening their hearts to someone from another world. Jack did not demand attention or reward. He continued his work, cleaned the halls, left surprises, and told stories. But now he was more than a janitor. To the children he was a friend, a teacher, and a bridge to joy they had almost forgotten. And so, in the quiet palace on a distant planet, trust began to grow. Step by step, story by story, game by game, the children discovered that someone could care for them without trickery, that laughter could be shared freely, and that even the simplest human could change the world around them. The palace had begun to feel lighter. The children's laughter echoed softly through the halls, and the air itself seemed warmer, brighter. Jack, the human janitor, moved quietly through the corridors, humming a gentle tune, unaware of how much he had changed the palace already. The queen watched from her balcony, her eyes wide with wonder. Her children, once so cautious and cold, were opening their hearts in ways she had thought impossible. One morning Jack decided to do something different. He gathered a few small items he had collected over the week: colored pebbles, folded notes, and tiny trinkets. He did not plan anything grand, he only wanted to bring a little more joy to the children. He set them up in the main atrium, arranging them in patterns, creating small paths and leaving little surprises along the way. The children discovered them, of course. One by one they tiptoed into the atrium, whispering to each other. Their eyes widened with curiosity, and for the first time they did not hide. They followed the paths, picked up the little trinkets, and discovered hidden jokes written in Jack's simple human symbols. Soft laughter began to fill the air, gentle at first, then stronger, freer. Jack appeared, smiling warmly. "I see someone found my little surprises," he said softly. The children nodded, giggling. He knelt down to their level, pointing to a tiny pebble arranged like a star. "Do you want to help me make a constellation?" he asked. The children's eyes lit up. They nodded eagerly. Together they arranged the pebbles into shapes of animals, planets, and strange creatures from their imagination. Jack laughed at their silly designs, and the children laughed too. One child made a long, twisting snake that almost reached the edge of the hall. Jack pretended to be scared of it and jumped back, making the children laugh even harder. The queen, watching secretly from a balcony, felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had never imagined hearing such laughter in her palace. Her children, once silent and distrustful, were now playing, sharing, and even teasing each other gently. And it had all been sparked by one human, who asked for nothing and gave everything quietly, with a heart full of kindness. After the pebble constellation, Jack led the children to a small stage in the atrium. It was a low platform used for ceremonies, but today it would serve a different purpose. Jack stood on the stage and began to perform a simple, silly act. He made funny faces, wiggled his fingers, and told a story about a clumsy human who tried to clean a palace with magic brooms. The children laughed so hard they could barely breathe. Their heads tilted back, their hands covered their mouths, and their eyes sparkled with joy. For the first time in years, the palace was filled with pure laughter. It was not polite or cautious, it was real. The sound carried through the corridors, reaching the ears of every servant, advisor, and guard. Even the queen smiled, a rare, wide smile that lit up her face. The children began to join in the performance, imitating Jack's funny faces and adding their own twists. They created new stories together, laughing at the absurdity and delighting in each other's creativity. Jack clapped for them, cheered them on, and laughed with them, never at them. The bond between them grew stronger with every shared giggle, every small act of play. That evening, as the sun set behind the palace towers, the children were reluctant to leave the atrium. They had discovered something they had almost forgotten. Joy could exist, even in a palace filled with caution and fear. Jack knelt down and said, "You all have such amazing ideas. You make this palace a happier place." The children looked at him with wide eyes. They had never been praised like this. They felt seen, valued, and safe. The queen stepped forward quietly. She approached Jack and said, "You have done something no one else could. My children trust you." Jack shook his head gently. "I only wanted to make them smile," he said humbly. The queen smiled, tears glistening. "Sometimes that is the greatest gift of all," she whispered. From that day on, the palace felt different. The halls were still grand, the towers still shone, but the most important change was invisible. The children's hearts were lighter. They laughed freely, played openly, and even sought out Jack's company. He had broken through their walls with patience, kindness, and joy. The children began to share their happiness with each other, whispering jokes, telling stories, and creating small games. Trust had taken root, and it was growing stronger every day. Jack continued his work quietly, cleaning the palace and leaving little surprises, but now he was also a teacher, a friend, and a symbol of hope. The queen watched her children sleep that night, listening to their soft laughter as they recounted the day's events to each other. She smiled and whispered, "Perhaps the smallest kindness can change the largest hearts." In the quiet palace on a distant planet, laughter had returned, trust had begun, and a human janitor had proven that courage and joy could bridge even the widest gaps between worlds. The palace felt alive in a way it never had before. The towers sparkled in the sunlight, and the corridors echoed with soft laughter. The queen's children were no longer distant, silent, or fearful. They moved through the halls with curiosity and joy, often stopping to play small games, share whispers, or discover another of Jack's tiny surprises. Jack, the human janitor, continued his work quietly. He swept floors, polished railings, and left little notes and drawings for the children. But now, his presence had become more than that of a helper. The children ran to him eagerly, asking for stories, games, and advice. He taught them small human tricks: how to fold paper animals, how to play simple ball games, and how to make patterns with colored stones. The children listened intently, laughing at every small mistake he made and celebrating every clever idea he shared. One afternoon, the queen watched as her children approached Jack with a plan. They wanted to create a game across the palace halls, using pebbles, notes, and small objects. Jack smiled and agreed to help. Together, they mapped out paths, hid little surprises, and created challenges for each other. The children laughed, competed playfully, and cheered each other on. They had never worked together like this before. The palace was filled with movement, sound, and warmth. The queen stepped forward from a quiet balcony, her heart full. She had seen her children grow from cautious, fearful beings into joyful, curious young ones. The transformation had come not from tutors, teachers, or advisors, but from a human janitor who treated them with patience, honesty, and care. She smiled at Jack and whispered, "You have given them something more valuable than treasure: trust, laughter, and friendship." Jack simply smiled and shook his head. "I only wanted them to be happy," he said softly. But the queen knew it was more than that. He had opened their hearts and shown them that not all outsiders were threats. That kindness, joy, and courage could exist even in a palace surrounded by fear. Over the next weeks, the bond between Jack and the children grew stronger. They shared simple stories of their worlds, alien and human alike. They taught him new games from their planet and he taught them old Earth games. They laughed at the differences and similarities, discovering that joy could be universal. Even the servants and advisors began to notice. The palace was lighter, more open, more alive. One evening, the children brought Jack to a balcony overlooking the planet's shining seas. They had collected small glowing stones and arranged them in patterns that spelled out their names. "For you," one child said shyly. Jack knelt down, touched the stones gently, and looked at the children. His eyes were full of quiet emotion. "Thank you," he said softly. "You have given me as much joy as I have given you." The queen watched this scene and felt a deep sense of peace. Her children had learned trust, friendship, and laughter, all because of a simple human who had entered their world with an open heart. They had grown stronger, happier, and more confident. Their laughter now filled the palace as naturally as the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. Even the smallest moments became precious. Jack would sit with them during meals, teach them riddles, or show them small tricks with objects. The children would playfully challenge him and he would laugh with them, never scolding, never mocking. They learned patience, empathy, and joy, not from lectures but from shared experiences and simple kindness. The queen called a small gathering in the main hall. She thanked Jack in front of everyone, acknowledging his role in her children's growth. "You have done what no one else could," she said. "You have taught my children to trust and to laugh again. For that, we are forever grateful." Jack bowed humbly, smiling. "I only wanted to help," he replied. But his simple words could not contain the impact he had made. From that day forward, Jack's place in the palace was permanent, not because of his title or his work, but because of the bond he shared with the children. They no longer feared strangers and they laughed more freely than ever. The palace had been transformed not by wealth, power, or magic, but by one human's patience, humor, and heart. At night, the queen often watched her children play quietly in the corridors, telling stories, hiding small surprises for each other, and laughing softly. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes the smallest heart can make the biggest difference." The palace was no longer a place of fear and silence. It was a home filled with laughter, curiosity, and love. And Jack continued his work quietly, cleaning floors, leaving notes, and sharing stories. But now he was part of something much larger than himself. He had become a friend, a teacher, and a symbol of hope. The children trusted him, laughed with him, and learned from him. In the palace high above the clouds, on a distant planet, a human janitor had shown that kindness, patience, and laughter could change lives forever. The palace would never be the same again. Trust had grown, laughter had returned, and a lasting bond had been formed. A bond that bridged worlds and hearts, proving that even the humblest human could make the greatest difference.